Reverend Rick Luciotti is the facilitator for clergy and clergy family care in our conference. He is a graduate of Elizabethtown College and the Palmer School of Theology, which is formerly the Eastern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's done additional study at the University of the Chicago Theological Seminary and Texas Tech University. He is a reality therapy certified through the William Glasser Institute for Reality Therapy and Choice Theory. Served as senior pastor of St. Mark's from 1994 to 2015. And in addition to his work with the Penn Central Conference, he has served in interim pastorates for a number of churches. He's also served as the director of shelter care at Bethany's Children's Home, was a group supervisor for Hennepin County, Minnesota, juvenile court services, and as a family and youth therapist for youth and family services in Ohio.
No,
Iowa, sorry. Sorry, I meant Iowa. And he lives with his wife for 49 years, Kathy, in the beautiful town of Cornwall, which is just an amazing town. Just a couple of reminders, and then I will say a prayer and then turn it over to Rick. This will be recorded. Paul in the church office will soon be working on putting all of the recordings from all of the online workshops on the website. So all of them will be available in addition to this one as well. I am also handling tech. So if you have, there's some more people in the waiting room. If you have any technical questions, you can just put them in the chat if that's easy for you to do. So let us begin with prayer. Mother, Father, Creator, thank you for fresh grace today and a week full of promise. Lead us in your ways and fill our hearts with your love and joy. Help us during our very busy and sometimes overwhelming lives to find ways to relax, heal, and rejuvenate. Help us to see others as you see them. Mother, Father, Creator, we ask that you guide every decision, response, effort, and conversation we have tonight and always in your name. And in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So Rick, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, again, it's very good to see each of you. And again, I extend an apology for having had to reschedule this. Sometimes life just throws us curveballs, and I appreciate your understanding. But it is good to be with you. And I also will certainly understand, since we had to reschedule, some of you may have other conflicts this evening. So if you suddenly need to disappear, that's one of the reasons we're recording it. But it's good to have you with us. I want to begin by saying that the prevention of vicarious trauma, the more I've thought about it, the more inclined I am to say our goal really is to lessen the impact of and better learning to cope with traumas that we encounter, because we've chosen a career, or a career has chosen us, in which we deal with trauma on a very frequent basis, and we can't avoid being impacted by the traumas of the people that we work with. By the very nature of our call, we relate with people, and we experience, for want of a better term, blowback from the things that occur to them. But I wanted to begin by asking, what are some of the traumatic episodes, traumatic events that bring you to the table this evening? Because, trauma is not the same for everybody. And some people experience it in different degrees. But what are some of the events that you cope with, that you confront, that can disrupt your equilibrium? And you don't all have to shout at once.
You will need to unmute first.
Yeah. Well, let me begin by telling you about a traumatic event that I encountered a number of years ago when I was one of my, we all as clergy have involvements in the community. And my involvement was being on-call chaplain for the fire rescue services in Lebanon, which I did for a number of years. And on a given Sunday morning following worship, as worship was ending, there was a telephone call asking if I could come to the railroad crossing on 12th Street in the city of Lebanon, where a gentleman had thrown himself in front of a freight train. And you can imagine the scene. And I worked with the police officers, the firemen, the paramedics who had to recover the body, and then the two witnesses who were on scene when the gentleman made his fatal plunge. Needless to say, it was a long, exhausting day. And I chose just to go home and think I could relax and work it away. But those scenes kept coming back throughout the evening. And I found myself having incredibly bad nightmares. And so the next day I called a friend who is a therapist, and I said, I need help. And he worked me through it. And so the first thing that I want to say is, no matter how well we do in our careers and our calling, there are moments, there are times that events that we're working with will simply overwhelm us. It comes to us in a number of different ways, and we will explore those as the evening goes on. But again, I'm curious if there are specific traumatic events that, if not haunting you, at times really disrupt your equilibrium.
Rick, I think there are three respondents. First,
Okay.
Catherine, you had unmuted your laptop. Did you want to respond? Catherine, and then Emily, and then Ronette.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Catherine.
Well, actually, it's Peter.
Oh, Pete. Hey, good to see you.
I'm not sure I have the right things about the subject matter, but just this past week, and I talked about it on Sunday morning, and I'm not sure if it was to everyone's pleasure or not, but it just hit me that, not that submarine and those 5 people weren't important, but how we as a human race, we as a society, now I'm hearing numbers like, I don't know, $5 million, $100 million investing in finding out what happened to that submarine. And it was days until we heard about that ship off of the coast of Greece, or a fishing boat or whatever it was that sank, trying to get refugees away from the horrors of their life to another place. And I still don't know what caused that, but I don't know how many hundreds of those refugees drowned.
Yeah.
And we hear nothing. I think about that. I know it's all just happened very recently, but I just can't put either one of them out of my head. The rich people and the poor people.
Mm-hmm.
But we hear more about the rich people than we do the poor people. And that just, it has caused me not to be able to sleep. And it has raised my blood pressure and got my ire up, and so much so that I don't usually stand on any kind of a political soapbox, but I couldn't resist on Sunday.
Yeah. Well, good for you for not resisting. Well, I'll get back to your comment, but I want to hear the other two.
It's Emily, Renette, and then Martha. So we'll turn to Emily next.
I had two instances that have kind of weighed on me in the last couple of years. Well, the last couple of years and then more recently. My father was a UCC minister for 35 years. And he died, it'll be 5 years ago on July the 7th. And I was the one that had to call 911. He had myasthenia gravis, an autoimmune disorder, and he went to take a nap and had some issues, and he was sent to the hospital, and he didn't make it. And I will never forget how pale he was and how long the EMTs worked on him at the house before they left to take him to the hospital. And it's still something I struggle with today. But more recently, back in January, I had been fighting a very difficult wound on my left heel, and on the 20th of January, I lost my foot and my ankle. I had to have an amputation. And spent between the hospital and rehab, spent a month in the hospital at Hershey, and then the inpatient rehab at Hershey. And it's still a day-to-day struggle, just trying to function, trying to get my prosthesis that I'm supposed to be getting this Friday, getting that to fit. Because I've got other complications. I have spina bifida. I have swelling due to lymphedema. So a lot of things, and it's been really, really hard the last almost 6 months. And it's just, sometimes it's hard not to wonder, could this have been prevented? I have avoided this? And I'll never know, but it's just hard sometimes and just weighs on me. And it's one of those times too where I miss my dad.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Any of us who've lost a parent, certainly can relate to the ebbs and flows of missing and celebrating their life, and then to complicate that with physical injury and physical loss makes for a very difficult time of recovery. And
Renette, and then Martha.
Well, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what Rick said, because I think what you said was brilliant and very important, that we, as pastors, sometimes forget that we have emotions and that we store a lot of things in our hearts and our souls. And so it is important, and we should have permission to go out and get the help that we need. I was part of the chaplaincy program for the Lancaster Township Fire Department, as well as the Susquehanna Regional Police Department, which involved 6 different agencies in that. And one night we got a call that a lady had drowned in the a husband of a lady had drowned in the Susquehanna. So I got called. And unfortunately, that night I was with 2 rookies, which really did not have the training that they should have to go out and tell the wife that her husband had passed. And so not only did we have all these levels, we had rookies who were not prepared, and then to find out that she was a probation officer and she had an arsenal of firearms and locked herself in the bedroom after she was told that her husband had passed away. And then, then other police officers that were there kind of debriefing them, and the water rescue and the fire department that had to pull this gentleman out of the water. So there was like, a pyramid of people that were involved in this one particular death that all had to deal with what happened that night. I mean, it was very scary. She locked herself in her bedroom with a ton of guns and ammunition and everything. And the rookies they didn't really know what to do. I mean, they were like, what do we do? And I'm like, I'm the chaplain. And we were all invest because you just never know. But my point of all of this is to say that we all had to come back and debrief and really talk things out, because this has been at least 15 years ago, and it still haunts me to watch how she responded, to watch how the rookies responded. I mean, it was just all these different elements. So thank you, Rick, for saying that, because I think we need to hear that and say, yes, you can have permission. You need to go and get help. One of the people that I go to see said, in pastors, it's like, he used this analogy that it's like going to a post office with all the little post office boxes, and pastors jam all the things that they can't really tell other people in their little post office boxes. But when is the time to open those post office boxes and clear out all the stuff that we keep inside before it, implodes? So just wanted to say thank you for saying that.
Well, and thank you for bringing up the term debriefing. I'll be talking a little bit more about debriefing later. But I also wanted to underscore that, we're invested in us is the importance of confidentiality. However, I want to say very clearly that our call to holding confidences does not preclude us from sharing in a therapeutic environment the experiences that we have with another professional who can help guide us through that, or a support group. And sometimes I think and I love the illustration that you used of post office boxes, because, I can remember one time forgetting to put my mail on hold and going to the mailbox, and the mailbox was so full that it took quite a long time to unjam everything and get it out. And so that was just a great illustration. I think Martha was next.
Martha, and then Judy has raised her hand.
Okay.
Well, as many of you know, I retired from the ministry on December 31st, and I began starting to write. And I have to say that a lot of the trauma that I have goes back to the ministry and to times in my life that I had experienced. And now, in a sense, when I begin to write about it, it's at that point, because there were situations in my ministry in the past that were never debriefed. Like I had been in Germany and came back very quickly, and I had spent 10 days in Auschwitz, and also had spent much time in Turkey, in Istanbul, and there was a military coup. And throughout my life, I didn't necessarily deal with it, but I started to deal with it more now that I'm retired and decided to write about it. But I think if you don't deal with trauma, or if you're not debriefed, especially from the mission field, especially when you go through certain things. And I mean, I don't want to even get into what it's like living in Auschwitz for 10 days in the SS barracks, and then taking a lot of youth through there and dealing with all the feelings that they do, and then living through what you do in a military coup in Istanbul. But I started writing this year and about it. And at the same time, I was having a medical issue with my eyes, and that made glare very difficult, and I had trouble seeing. And in fact, I came back from the eye doctors and had trouble seeing right after that. And it's at that point when all the writing that I had done and all the experiences that I had been writing about really, really hit me. I don't know what else it could have been, because but what really helped, what I really needed to do was to get a lot of therapy about this too, and to talk through, and interestingly enough, the things that had been, I guess my psychiatrist said it, I had an episode, which was witnessed by my husband, but not by myself. But you know, it's part of a chemical imbalance that I have, that I'm predisposition for, and I only had a couple times in my life, including once in Turkey and another time in 2001. But this was the third time it happened to me, and it's like, and it's a chemical imbalance can be controlled. Now, if you have a traumatic experience and deal with stresses and are have predisposed towards heart attacks, you might have a heart attack. But my medical condition just happens to provide a chemical imbalance for me, and my response is probably, I might have looked like I was on a drug or a drunk or something like that, acting erratically. But it's just that I think probably whenever you go through these traumatic situations and you start really facing them, which I started facing them more this year, I went through a lot of therapy then with it, and dealing with it is very freeing then.
Well, very good. Thank you, Martha, for sharing that.
Including Rick coming over to see me there at Phil Haven when he did.
Yeah.
I think was a helpful thing. I'm
You bring up
sorry.
two very, no, you brought up two very important topics there. The transitioning to retirement, which often brings about, you know, a series of coping, especially when you're drawing on remembrances of past things. And then, you know, with retirement and getting a bit older, there are health issues, and that can create a lot of trauma as well. So thank you for adding those to the mix. I believe there was one more person.
Judy.
Yeah, hello all. I'm eating, so I don't like to eat on screen. That's why my
Okay.
camera's not
Fine,
on.
Judy.
But I did want to say I am a chaplain, and one of the things that I think has haunted me the most was one of the experiences I had as a hospital chaplain in a trauma situation, when both it was of a murder-suicide, and both families appeared to the emergency room because both the one suspected of the murder as well as the victim, were both brought to the trauma unit. And it was very difficult to separate that situation, i.e., it was probably the first time that I realized that the perpetrator's family has as many feelings and deserves the same kind of care, the same kind of concern that the victim's family does. And that was quite an eye-opening experience for me, and one that I still reflect upon and question, you know, just thinking, so how did I do in that situation? And there are days that it just comes back to me quite vividly of how difficult that was. But it's been a great lesson in trying not to be so quick when these like school shootings, etc., happen. I know they're tragic events, but I try not to be so quick to place blame on the families or whatever of the one who did the shooting, and realize that their families are experiencing emotions just as the families of those who have died. So that was quite eye-opening for me.
Well, thank you, Judy. That's an incredibly important perspective, because the truth of the matter is, going into situations, we rarely know the backstory of what brings people into our orbit. And when you have two potentially very volatile, colliding family units together, boy, the stress on that's that just goes up exponentially. We also had comment from Emily, about the impact in our roles on our children, who oftentimes experience us coming home with a load of emotions. And so with those points, I want to take us into what I call coping within the situation and coping in the aftermath of the situation. Renette brought up the subject of debriefing. Debriefing is a very valuable aspect of learning to limit the impact that another person's trauma has on us, or the trauma that we experience has on ourselves. The critical incident stress management is what I'm drawing from when I talk about debriefing. But debriefing is a process wherein which we take the time to share with a trusted person what the situation was, what our role was in the situation, what we did in the situation, and how the outcome of the situation was, and quite honestly, the impact it's making on our lives, not just on our feelings, but also on our thinking. Because somebody raised the topic that sometimes we get into second guessing after the fact. Debriefing is valuable because you get the feedback of other people. Sometimes we're so invested and so involved in the situation that we don't have as clear a perspective. And so being able to take the time following an event to talk it through with a person or a group of persons is critically important, because they can give us feedback from what they hear, which oftentimes gives us a sense of direction for where we go next. But I also believe that in terms of learning to cope within and also the aftermath, it goes back prior. As we have experience, as we participate in ministerium and listen to colleagues, we begin to get a sense of the various things we're going to encounter. And one of the things I want to stress this evening is that we develop plans for how we want to cope with various situations. I encourage people to do troubleshooting. Let your mind just wander and think of all the potential situations that you might encounter. And this is best done, again, in a group of people, wherein which we talk about various scenarios. And that helps us to stress test our planning. The old adage, nobody plans to fail, but many times people fail to plan. And I think many times we go into situations not as prepared as we might be. Most of us have talked about the fact that there's a lot of things seminary doesn't prepare us for. And that's where I believe participation in ministerium or just a good group of colleagues. I know when I was doing counseling, we met weekly, as a counselor group, and we talked through our cases. We also went to clinical supervision every week. And the agency that I worked for was foresighted enough that it required us to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and Al-Anon meetings on a regular basis. And if you've ever been to an Al-Anon meeting, you learn real fast that you can't do everything alone. And I know that attending Al-Anon was incredibly helpful for me. Probably some of the best training I ever had came from those in the Al-Anon group who had been coping with and surviving family members' substance abuse systems for years. And they could cut through excuses, they could cut through denial faster than you can imagine. Also want to encourage that it's important to develop ahead of time a sense of resources that are available, so that we don't do, as Renette was saying, start pigeonholing the emotions and locking them away. I've used the example with people that oftentimes when we have a funeral, we have a relationship to some degree with the deceased. But we know that during the 3 or 4 days prior to the funeral, we've got to be available to the family. We've got to be planning and organizing, and we simply cannot allow ourselves to be thinking too much about how that person's passing has impacted us. I want to say to people, I think it's very appropriate, and especially if your church has a pastoral relations committee, and this is part of the planning ahead, to talk through with them that, you know, a colleague of mine who recently passed away, John Binkley, made it very clear to the congregations he served that after a funeral of a member of the church, he was done for the day. He was going to take that time, contact a colleague, and debrief. And he was going to work through his grief at the loss of that person, the loss, what that loss of the person meant to how relationships would change in the church. And you know, and John was very clear that he needed that time, the rest of the day, so that, to piggyback on what Emily said earlier, that he didn't take all those emotions home and make his family pay the price. And you know, so decompressing after an event, and you know, and there's a million different ways to do it. I know that, I think we've all had this experience. We all have parishioners who, when we do a home visit with them, it's not something we're looking forward to doing. And sometimes we have to really gear ourselves up, especially when you're going into a situation. I'll just focus on myself for a moment. If you know you're going into a situation where the person is going to be very negative, they're going to be very complaining, they have no filter, and they're probably going to be telling you things about their health issues that is way too much information. And I make myself little promises that if I do this visit, then I can take the next hour and a half and go to a bookstore and just kind of go through the bookstore and relax. You know, I sort of, if you want to say, bribe myself to do that visit, but it's a coping mechanism. And so again, planning ahead, developing a plan, stress testing it, and sharing it with other people. It becomes a whole part of what I want to say is learning to take effective and efficient care of ourselves. And by effective care of ourselves, I'm saying finding the right thing to do in a situation. And efficient care is finding the best way to do it. As an example, it could be that we've been feeling physically lousy. And effective care at that point would probably begin by getting an appointment with a physician, getting a physical, getting a thorough exam. And then efficient care would be to take the physician's recommendations and put those into practice. Effective care and efficient care. And I want to also separate that self-care is different from self-indulgence. Self-care is finding helpful outlets for the things that we're experiencing to redirect our attention. When I was doing a chaplaincy program at Children's Hospital in Chicago, I found myself early on becoming a bit overwhelmed by the sadness that I was experiencing. This was in the early 1970s, when if a child went to Children's Hospital with leukemia, the overwhelming odds were they were not leaving the hospital. And I was on that unit. And about 3 weeks into that, after about 7 or 8 children had passed away and I'd been with their families, I found myself just overwhelmed by it. And my supervisor said to me, let's take a walk. And we walked down to the Lincoln Park Zoo. And he bought us a couple of hot dogs, and it was snowing a little bit, but he said, what do you see over there? And there was a playground, and there were children laughing and singing and running and jumping and playing in the playground. And I told him what I saw, and he said, what do you think that means? And I said, that means there's a lot of really healthy children out there. And he said, keep that perspective. He said, I come down here at least 3 times a week to watch healthy children play. It balances out what we're experiencing every day in the hospital. So sometimes effective care is finding a healthy outlet that helps give us balance to the things that we're experiencing. Ran through a lot of materials there. Any questions or comments at this point?
Curtis has his hand raised.
I'm sorry, what?
You can
Curtis,
continue on.
Okay. Yeah, there you are, Curtis.
You can continue on, Rick.
Oh, okay.
We're fine. Yep.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, I want to talk about some of the,
oh, Martha has her hand raised.
okay,
Yeah.
very good.
My question was that you said sharing with your partner in a way, or keeping certain things from your partner, or not taking certain things to your partner from what goes on in your work when you're having a stressful situation or so forth through your ministry. I think you made a comment about how you relate to your partner in either sharing, when to share and when not to share.
Yeah, I mean, some of that we work out in our relationships as the years go by. And
I don't hear you.
You're muted, Rick.
Somehow you're muted.
sorry about that. All of us bring stuff home, and our spouse can tell if something's not right, our significant other. But I think it's critically important for us to understand that while we can have comfort and solace from our spouse, there are things that we don't share that are better shared in a pastoral support group, shared with a therapist, so that when we go home, we deal with family matters and that we can be available. It's and simply going home and sitting in the corner and trying to stuff all that stuff behind usually ends up blowing up, or we start picking at things that are just not fair to the other person, or we're just not there for them. It is a fine balance, but again, that's why I'm laying stress on finding a pastoral support group, a group of clergy in your area that I know a number of folks who get together, clergy who get together on a very regular basis, oftentimes once a week. Maybe it's for breakfast, maybe it's for lunch. They spend some time just kind of reacquainting themselves each week, but then they break down into a time of prayer and study, and sharing concerns, and together that becomes a very effective support group and way to debrief situations, troubleshoot situations. We can learn coping techniques from them. And I can't stress enough, again, I'll go back to my friend John Binkley, who made it very clear with his churches that he was going to be a part of that support group every week because he saw that as part of the ministry, so that he was his best self when he walked into the church, and that he wasn't carrying a lot of unresolved burdens with him. In some respects, I say it's learning to practice the art of detachment, learning to distance ourselves from the emotional impact by coping with it in a more effective fashion. Pretending that it doesn't bother us usually ends up, as I said, in some dysfunctional behavior, and our families all too often pay the price, or our friends pay the price. So pastoral support groups, finding somebody that you can do some good therapeutic work with. We have resources at the conference to assist clergy who are struggling. When Renette was in the role that I have now, she made that available to people. We're constantly making available to clergy therapeutic outlets for them, for coping more effectively and efficiently with the traumas that sometimes happen in their life, or those that they're encountering on a day-to-day basis. We all know the scenario, and it usually happens at the high times, such as Advent and Lent, when you're in the midst of preparations, and the next thing you know, you have 3 funerals in the week, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to get ready for Sunday morning. And those are things that we can plan for ahead of time, because it's going to happen at some point. How can I cope? How can I make arrangements? Who can I call on that might be able to carry some of the load? Again, it's planning ahead. It's troubleshooting and anticipating things that might come up, and how we can more effectively process and cope. And again, finding good outlets. I should say this, other staff joke quite a bit about my penchant for being on the golf course all the time. It's a tremendous outlet for me. I know that wouldn't work for everybody, but everybody should develop some meaningful outlets where they can just relax, be themselves, develop some friends outside of the church who are not clergy. I think getting to know people in the community and developing some relationships there, where you can just kind of let down your hair a little bit without violating confidentiality. Because again, I think it's true of many clergy that we just work ourselves into a corner. We don't take enough breaks. We don't communicate very well with the leadership of our churches. And as Renette said earlier, or intimated earlier, we don't ask for help when we richly need it. And I think it's just critically important. We can't change the fact that people are going to die. and sometimes tragically in our churches. We can't change the fact that we're going to be called to the hospital when somebody, as was stated earlier, has been the victim of a serious crime and both families end up being there, or both families involved in a horrendous automobile accident end up in the emergency room, and people are looking to us to find a way to help them with that. It's just so very important for us to understand that how we take care of ourselves prepares us for dealing effectively with the experiences we have. Again, clergy self-care is best viewed as clergy learning to develop significant interactions and relationships with peer, family, and friends outside the parish for adjusting to and coping with the demands of pastoral ministry. Biggest mistake I think clergy make is totally immersing themselves in the life of the church and not having any outlets. I worked some years back with a retired pastor who lamented that had he found a hobby, he would have been a much happier and healthier person, and he would probably have better family relationships. And again, this was some years back in another part of the country, but it was a person who was very alone, recognized the fact that he consistently worked 70, 80 hours a week, and thought he was doing the work of the kingdom, only to find that he was really bereft of any meaningful relationships as his life was coming to an end. And it was just a really sad experience to see that. And I'm afraid we have probably far too many of our clergy that fall into that situation. So again, I just want to stress that consider all the things that you will experience, have experienced, start developing plans for how you might cope with those going into the situation, what resources you can tap, because there's nothing that says you have to bring all the answers to the table. You know, I've said to quite a number of clergy who say to me that they're overwhelmed by their counseling load. And I say to them, I think you're making a serious mistake. Pastoral counseling is important, but when the situation is going to require ongoing intervention on the part of a person, I think it's important to make referrals. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, clergy probably cannot, in most cases, if not all cases, cannot afford clinical supervision, someone to run the case by, to show you, help you see where you may be making errors. Most clergy don't have a counseling support group, again, that is subordinate to clinical supervision, but it's also very effective in helping us keep our perspective. And so learning to develop a set of resources in the community where you can refer people. Sometimes it's something as simple as, I know a few years ago, we had a clergy pass away, and the spouse really wasn't ready for it. And fortunately, I had developed a relationship with a financial person who was able, who gave their service gratis to help the spouse get things organized and move on. I think the problem that too often happens is clergy think they have to solve the problem, and instead of being effective in helping the person, they become enmeshed in the person's problem. And so I want to stress to everybody, learning the resources that are in your community. And I know not every community has great resources, but most communities have people who just know how to relate. And so not every problem has to be solved by a professional therapist. Sometimes there's just people in our churches who are in our community who just flat out know how to talk to somebody. And you can, develop some of those relationships, and you can say to a person, you might want to sit down and talk with old John down the street. I think he might have some insights. Again, utilize resources that are available throughout the community, and please stop thinking that the pastor has to solve everything. If there's a lie from the pit of hell, that's one of them. And I think too many times we get ourselves into significant difficulty thinking that it's our job to solve problems. I think it's oftentimes our job to guide and suggest where people can go to get help. Other thoughts?
Yeah, seeking help for the clergy. Yeah, is Scott Watts still around?
Yes, he is, and he's available.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
Yeah, I want to suggest that if, as we're talking this evening, any of this is resonating and saying, boy, I need to do something, or I'd like to explore something, please give me a call in the next coming days. And I can make a ton of resources available. We have significant resources available. Scott Watts is one, Jeff Hamilton's another. We have the Samaritan Counseling Center that we have a contract with. And we have a number of other resources available. One of the resources that is available is if you can oftentimes just contact the chaplain at the local hospital and chat with them and say, I'm experiencing this. And oftentimes they have resources available as well. The comment just came in about having talked with a chaplain at the hospital. I know that there's a number of times where we have clergy who are going to the hospital, and the situation is such that I can't get there, and especially during COVID, and hospital chaplains were invaluable to us during the COVID epidemic. When we couldn't get in to see people, we would call hospital chaplains often, and they really became the clergy for a lot of our people during that time. So Pete, that's a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Karen raised her hand.
Okay.
Oh, I was just going to affirm what you said, Rick, about counseling, because I tell them the first time, I say, you've got 3 shots,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're out.
Sure.
I will find you a source, but
Mm-hmm.
I have a degree in guidance and counseling, but I'm not going to spend my days doing that.
Right.
And I say, I'll see you 3 times and then I'll refer you.
Sure. And the other reason, and I'm glad, and it's important to set standards and stick with them. That's also a part of effective care. And the other reason I say don't get into those kind of counseling relationships, one of the things that I believe very strongly is that if I start to see a person, I can't, and I set an appointment with them, I cannot put myself in a situation where I may be needing to cancel that appointment. Because if you're seeing somebody and somebody dies and you have a funeral, guess what? And so I've often told people, as you do, Karen, I'm going to refer you because I can't guarantee you that I can see you on that consistent basis. Too many things come up in the pastor's life. And an ongoing counseling relationship, it is critical that the person can count on the fact that you're going to be there. And we're just not that person in our careers. You know, it just doesn't happen. So thank you for bringing that up.
Ronette has her hand up.
Okay.
I think one of the things we have to be careful about when we are pastors and we're counseling is codependency.
Yes.
Because we're not just your typical counselor where you go in once a week. They have another kind of relationship with you. So they have an easier tendency to become codependent on you, which can be a nightmare.
Yeah, it is so easy to become enmeshed in situations, and I can't prove it because I haven't done a lot of research, but my gut tells me that most boundary violations stem from clergy getting themselves enmeshed or codependent in situations. And, you know, and unfortunately, we have way too many of those situations. You know, and probably one of the biggest situations, and again, it goes back, I love that example of the mailboxes. You know, the number of clergy with anger management issues, again, stems from not having learned how to share concerns, and you just keep bottling things up, and eventually it's going to explode. It's like trying to hold a ball, you know, a beach ball under the water. Eventually it's going to slip away and it's going to pop up and probably pop you in the face. And, you know, the other thing I like to say to folks is that we may think we have all the answers, and people may want to try to put that on us that, well, you're the pastor, you know, but we have to prevent, in a creative and a caring way, not letting people put us on a pedestal, and just reminding ourselves always that we're just a person. We have a special call, but that does not immunize us from all the stuff that happens to everybody else.
Amelia has her hand raised, and then
Okay.
Karen.
Okay.
Yes, Amelia.
I just wanted to take off on what Ronette and then you
Mm.
began to allude to in the boundary issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's a relationship of power, and it's
Yeah.
a relationship of not power.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the best of circumstances, most parishioners do not recognize that it is a relationship where, perceived or otherwise, the pastor has power in the relationship that puts the parishioner at a disadvantage.
Mhm.
And that it's beholden upon that pastor to recognize that and act accordingly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, that gets, you know, I keep circling back to self-care, taking effective care and efficient care. To me, that, you know, finding the right thing to do, and finding the most efficient way to do it is the best way to avoid the frustrations that so often, you know, lead to the kind of critical boundary issues that Amelia was just mentioning. You know, the simple truth of the matter for each of us is that at times, even our best of intentions for or our efforts at self-care will not produce the results that we desire. You know, and when it does, we have to be willing to share with people that it's a rough time. You know, and take suggestions. You know, the old adage, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. When we experience frustration, is a time for us to reorganize. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, or chaos. You're right, Amelia. We have a lot of our peers who live in a perpetual state of chaos. Sometimes they think the best way to avoid dealing with things is to just stay busy. But we all know that energy runs out, and the busier you are, eventually you're going to stop. You're going to hit the point of diminishing returns, and you're not going to be terribly effective in your position. So learning when we're experiencing frustration, to ask ourselves the question, what is it that I legitimately need right now? And what are the ways in which I can get that need met? And if the ways you're trying to meet your needs aren't happening, then it's time to sit down with some people and troubleshoot other ways to meet your needs. We all love to think that we can be like that circus performer, keeping all those plates spinning. But what we fail to realize is that the circus performer who gets all the plates spinning does that for maybe 5 minutes a day. We have too many peers that are trying to do that for a career, and it's not going to work, and it's going to always end up in disaster.
Karen had her hand raised.
Okay. Yes, Karen.
Well, at the risk of starting a food fight, when you were talking about bottling up and eating our emotions and all that stuff because we can't talk about it, do you think there's a gender disparity in there? I mean, my experience has been that it's very difficult for men to talk openly about what's going on in their hearts and their in their heads and their lives.
Yeah.
But I don't have any statistics or anything to prove that. But I just wonder if there is any research that's been done on that it's more common for male clergy in our case.
Yeah. I can't put my finger on any specific research, but there's one statistic: women outlive men. And so I think I would tend to agree with you. And when men do talk about their emotions, we have a tendency to kind of really go out around the topic without really getting around to what we're really talking about. Obviously, there's going to be exceptions, but I think of women meet in circles, they meet in groups. Most guys, I think I can say most guys, they can shoot the breeze, they can harass each other, but getting down to talking about what's really going on is doggone scary stuff. Now whether women find resolution through those circles might be another matter. But that's again why I want to put stress on finding the efficient way to do things. If you're dealing with issues of substance abuse, Al-Anon is probably much better than going out for coffee and talking about the problem. I have my daughter's permission to say this. She was in the restaurant industry, made big league restaurant business in season in South Florida, and every day started at 3 o'clock and ended about 3 in the morning, and wine tastings were mandatory. And after 3 years, she checked herself into a treatment center. And, I thought, okay, I've told everybody how important Al-Anon is. It's time for me to start going to Al-Anon now while she's in treatment and then beyond. And oh boy, did they turn me inside out. And all the second guessing, what did I do that caused this, all that kind of stuff. And, I don't know who gained more out of that period of time, her or me, in terms of growing up. Because all my quote unquote expertise wasn't going to solve the problem. I needed somebody to turn the tables on me. And Al-Anon did that very effectively. So I think you're probably right that women have a tendency to talk about concerns more. The question I raise is, are they in situations where they do it effectively and efficiently? And again, I can't point to any studies, but that's just my gut level feeling.
Thank you. I also, when you talk about being able to just listen, there's another gender thing. Men seem to want to solve the problem. I mean, I could come home and start telling St. Charles, and he would say, well, babe, what you need to do is, and I think, preachers do it too. And I mean, I know how easy it is to try to help people or think you're helping solve a problem. It's easy to fall into that and I'm not even sure why we do it, if it's self-aggrandizement or if it makes us, it's our messianic complex or what it is that makes clergy try to help people, quote, solve problems. But I think there's a gender disparity there too.
Best advice I think I was ever given in my training was when it was suggested to me, learn to ask questions and listen. Most people will tell you what they need if you simply ask questions. Don't begin by trying to give advice. Ask questions. Again, that gets back to planning ahead. When I go into a certain situation, it's fair to start off by saying, what were you hoping to accomplish? What need were you trying to meet? And before long, the person will tell you everything you need to know. And usually they'll solve the problem themselves. The more questions you ask, and the more you simply listen. So I think you're absolutely right on that.
Martha has her hand raised.
Yes, you were using the words effective and efficient, and I think you were alluding to the fact then after you followed that, when we talked about what was effective and efficient, I was wondering how you measure that, and then you were starting to talk about how people will talk, and maybe they're the ones who, by expressing what it is they have to say upon their heart, are the ones that are able to make it clear to you what is helpful to them by enabling them to talk is the most effective and efficient thing that you can do. But is there anything else how do you measure what's helpful? How do you measure knowing what it is that you're doing is going to be helpful to people? And
well, you can troubleshoot with people. You can begin by asking questions. Have you tried X, Y, and Z? And you can ask questions along the lines of, if you were happy, what would be happening in your life? It's just taking the time to ask a lot of questions. What need were you trying to meet when you did that? And sometimes I know working with parents, and parents would be sitting in the room, and you could see the veins in their neck sticking out. They were so frustrated with the child. and that they were so frustrated with their child, and they were mad, they were angry, and the child was retaliating. And I would sometimes just ask a simple question: do you love your child? And they'd say, well, of course I love my child. And they'd oftentimes say, I wouldn't be this upset if I didn't love my child. And then I would ask the question, do you think the way you're expressing that love right now is helpful? And it would usually stop the conversation, and people would be thinking through, and usually the answer was, well, no, I guess what I'm doing isn't working. Well, how else might you express your concern? How else might you communicate that you really love this person? You know, I get that you're frustrated, but is the way you're expressing your frustration helping or hurting the situation? You know, those are sort of the things that I'm trying to get at in effective, you know, effectiveness in that situation is saying, yes, I love you. Efficient is how you communicate that love. And is yelling and screaming at the child, you know, communicating that love, or is it giving them a different message? You know, because Amelia touched on it, and the power differentials in situations. Not only clergy and their parishioners, but parents and children, there's a power differential. And, you know, the person in power, I think it's incumbent on them to recognize and accept that they're in the power position. And, you know, you can't presume upon that. We have to learn to share from that standpoint, and we learn to respect. And one of the best ways to respect is to simply, as Karen said, listen. You know, ask people questions and listen to the answer. And if the answer produces another question, ask that question. Not like a district attorney interrogating, but as somebody who really wants to know what the other person is thinking.
Amelia has her hand raised, and I'm just gonna we have about 15 more minutes.
Okay.
One of the things they teach you in CPE and encourage you to learn how to do is reflective listening.
Yeah.
And you described it very, very well, wherein you ask a question, you not only listen to the answer, but you hear what's being said. And those are two different things.
Sure.
And then reflect back to the individual, because generally what you're going to hear may not be what they intended to say.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good way to clarify, especially in the type of situation you were describing, in a situation of emotion, in a situation of heightened anxiety, where not only do you need to be the non-anxious presence, but you need to reflect back to the individuals what you are observing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and learn, you know, part of planning ahead is planning some exit strategies for yourself, so that, as you said, you don't want to be an anxious presence in there. You want to be able to be calm and reflect. You know, now there are situations where you have to be authoritative, but for the most part, it's being able to communicate that, okay, this is difficult, but we can work stuff out. You know, it may not work out exactly the way you wanted it to work out, but but it can be good. You know, things may never be the same again, but that doesn't mean they can't be good. You know, too often, and you know, clergy and anybody goes into a situation and they want things to be a certain way. You know, I joked today, somebody had asked me about my knee replacement from a year and a half ago. And I said, it's really doing quite well. It will never be showroom quality again, but it's a heck of a lot better. at the beginning, I forget who it was who said, it's just wonderful not to be living in pain anymore. So sometimes it's just recognizing that the outcome may not be everything that we want, but is it a heck of a lot better than where we were? And is it something I can live comfortably with? And so some of that means doing some real value clarifications as well. I chatted with a person the other day, and we're both in our early 70s, and the person was just grexing about what they can't do anymore. And I use that Pennsylvania Dutch word, grexing. And I said, but there's so many things we can do. And I said, don't get me wrong, I get it. Because a younger person had said to me, boy, it'll be nice to be older and have all that collected wisdom. And I said to him, listen, I would trade all that wisdom to wake up in the morning without pain. There's something to be said for being young and stupid. But being able to recognize what stage of life we're in, and that there's certain realities, and finding the things we can do that make life meaningful and special at this point, at each stage of life, and recognizing every stage has things that you can and can't do. And for clergy, recognizing that we can't solve every problem. And the best we can do is be honest with people, listen carefully, and help them find the resources that will help them solve their issue. And other questions, other concerns? Well, Shirley, I'm going to turn it back to you and let you wrap it up. But if there are any other questions, I make this offer. If you don't want to ask it tonight, feel free to give me a call tomorrow.